Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Megan Phillips. I am a faculty research associate and instructor here at ASU. I was a global health major, so it's really cool to meet current students and hear all of your different career paths and backgrounds. To be honest, it was a little weird. I put together a lot of presentations, not usually on myself, so hopefully this isn't too self-indulgent and helpful to some of you, but I'm happy to share kind of my experiences and what I've learned. I've had a really great experience at ASU, and I'm really lucky to have a job that I love right now. So I'm excited to share it all with you. Let's see if I can get my slides working. There we go. So I did my bachelor's in global health. I started in 2013 and graduated in 2017. And then right after my bachelor's, I went into a master's in science of healthcare delivery, which is also at ASU. It's on the downtown campus in the College of Health Solutions. When I was in high school, I was applying to a bunch of different schools and got a really good offer to come to ASU. I'm actually from Wisconsin, and the weather really drove me here. But when I was looking at different majors, one of the reasons I chose global health is I had a lot of interest in political science and foreign relations. And also was at the time a pre-medical student, which I'll talk a little bit about how kind of my career trajectory changed later on. But didn't even know global health was a major until I came to ASU, but thought it was a really good kind of mix of my interests. And I liked it because it was a broad enough field that it would match really well with my pre-medical coursework and just other interests and professional experiences that I wanted to gain during my time at ASU. So I'll start just giving some of the things that were really important to me in my undergraduate experience. So when I was a freshman, I applied to, there's a number of different labs within SHESC, and I got a position within the Laboratory of Culture Change of Behavior with Dr. Daniel Hrushka. This was really like my first exposure to research at all. So it was a really good way for me to kind of get my foot in the door. Just get some kind of basic skills in, we did a lot of like interviews and coding, qualitative data analysis, and I got to work with a lot of PhD and other graduate students and learn from them and learn from Dr. Hrushka, who's also a great mentor. And I worked at that lab on and off throughout my time in my undergrad program. And then there were two kind of key organizations that were really influential for me when I was an undergrad, and the first one was Student Health Outreach for Wellness, which is also known as SHO. This is an organization that it's a student-run free clinic for people experiencing homelessness. So when I was an undergrad, we would run a Saturday clinic at the kind of major homeless shelter downtown, which is near the Capitol. And we had students and preceptors from a variety of different disciplines, from medicine, nursing, social work, speech pathology, and a ton of others. And then so it was a really cool experience with undergrads. It was a really interesting role because we would be paired as patient navigators with each patient that came into the clinic, and just help them sort of fill out their paperwork, get a little bit about their background, take their vitals, and then sort of follow them throughout their visit in the clinic that day. And I was also director of programs. So we did a lot of like health education classes each Saturday in the shelter's community center. And we would do classes like for like diabetes and hypertension, we'd focus on nutrition and medication management. We do like foot and ankle clinics with physical therapy students, and just a variety of different things each Saturday. And it was a really good experience just to get that kind of one-on-one patient relationship that I think is really important for anyone wanting to go into health profession education. I was also a member of the Phi Sigma Pi National Honor Fraternity, which is not really related to global health, but was a really fun way to meet other academically oriented students, and a lot of like professional development and networking opportunities that came out of that. I also had a student worker position at ASU Foundation, so got some experience in fundraising and event planning, which at the time I didn't really think was super relevant, but now that I work as an academic, a lot of what I do is asking for funding from research funders. So I think even in those kind of jobs, even if you have to have kind of just a paying job to get you through college, I think there's a lot of ways to learn from positions like that. And then it was also kind of my first experience in a business office and a corporate environment. So I learned a lot there as well. And then I was also a patient ambassador in the Banner Emergency Department. And I think that combined with my time at SHESC really kind of drove my interest in working with vulnerable populations. We would see, obviously people are coming into the emergency department for medical reasons, but there's a lot of kind of underlying social determinants of health that can influence a person's overall well-being. And so obviously like a lack of housing can be really challenging if you're someone who, needs a refrigerator for your medication or, just a safe place to sleep at night. And so you would see a lot of patients who are kind of struggling with those kind of things in the emergency department. And that really drove my interest. And now my research kind of focuses broader on social services and how that plays into improving population health. I was a Barrett student, so I did my undergraduate thesis. I created a health education programming, a 6-week class for pregnant and parenting women who were struggling with opioid use disorder. I worked with Crossroads, which is a residential treatment facility, and they have a women's specific residential facility downtown, and I ran that class for them and just kind of used a lot of my connections and experiences through SHESC and had a really great mentor as well who kind of helped me through my thesis project. And that was a really good deliverable that I came out of and having my written thesis, and was able to show that as sort of an example of kind of my writing skills and program development and so forth. And I've used that in subsequent job applications. In my graduate program, I did a 1-year master's in science of healthcare delivery. I had an internship with the Office of US Senator John McCain. I became really interested in health policy at this point because while I really wanted to go to medical school, I found that the hard sciences weren't necessarily as interesting to me. And while I really liked the one-on-one kind of patient relationship that you would develop, I became really interested in sort of how do we change policy at kind of a state or a federal or a local level to change things like people's access to housing or to give people access to care. Just because we have this massive healthcare system, a lot of people still aren't able to get in to see physicians or able to afford their medications. And I was really interested in that kind of policy systems level of thinking. While I was at Senator McCain's office, I focused on veteran suicide prevention and worked with Be Connected, which is a statewide program for service members, veterans, and their families. And they sort of use that kind of social services model, what we call like a public health approach to suicide prevention, in that we not only provided crisis services and mental health treatment, but we also connected people to housing, to employment, to social support systems, kind of all of these things that really impact the overall health and happiness and well-being of an individual. I also had a research assistant position at the University of Arizona Phoenix College of Medicine and focused on a study looking at kind of the prevalence of diabetes and hypertension among people experiencing homelessness, and was able to work with a lot of physicians and medical students in that role. And then something that I think was really helpful for me during graduate school, and I wish I had done more of during my undergrad career, was I was able to attend a lot of conferences. I think as an undergrad, it might be a little bit intimidating to apply or just attend a conference, but I absolutely loved them. It was a really good way for me to just get exposure to people all across the country. And I was able to go to some international conferences as well, just to meet different professionals, to learn about their career paths, to hear about their research. And I think it was really helpful for me in figuring out what got me really excited and interested, and then sort of what the topic areas that I wasn't as interested in. And that sort of determined, me really wanting to go more into research and to focus more in mental health and substance use issues. So those are some of the conferences that I was able to go to while I was a grad student. And there's actually Beyond Flexner, just a shout out to that conference. ASU is hosting it, I think, in a few weeks. And it's kind of focused on social justice and health professional education, but could be a good opportunity if you're looking just for a type of conference to just get a little bit more exposure and to get networking opportunities with people from around the country. After I graduated with my master's, I spent a few months working, or more than a few months, but at Vitalist Health Foundation, and they're a nonprofit foundation, and they provide a lot of funding to different community organizations around the state to improve health, and they define that really broadly. So I did a lot of grant application reviews, which was really helpful because I ended up in my current job, I do a lot of grant writing. So looking at sort of how people ask for funding and ways to strategically invest money into community organizations that can really make a difference in improving the health of communities. I also continued my work with veteran suicide prevention and was a project manager at the Phoenix VA healthcare system downtown, and worked with, because at this point, Senator John McCain had passed, but I moved on to the Phoenix VA healthcare system to keep working on that project and ended up working on it for 3 years. And I still kind of work on that project a little bit, but not as much as I used to. I did a little bit of TA work when I was a grad student. And so after I graduated, I was offered an instructor position. And so these are just some of the classes that I was able to teach. And this photos from my first ever class that I taught, which was a very nerve-wracking experience, but I had some wonderful students. And just, it was really interesting switching from kind of the student perspective to being on the teaching side and working through curriculum development and working a lot of my public speaking skills, and then to be able to, talk about subjects that I was really passionate about, and to be able to connect with students and other faculty who provided some really great mentorship for me. So I am now mostly a researcher. I don't do as much teaching anymore, other than a little bit of TA work, but here's some of the research projects that I've been working on in this last year. So after I graduated with my graduate program, the Be Connected, the suicide prevention program that I worked for, actually approached me and said, there's this funding announcement from the CDC. We would really like you to write a grant for us. And if we win the grant, then we can pay for your time to keep working on this project in a paid capacity. So I wrote the grant for them and we got it. And I used that funding to fund about half of my salary at ASU. And was able to keep getting a kind of a continual stream of funding for the next few years. And then I also, through my graduate program, became really close with several different faculty and was able to jump on some of their grant funded projects. So I did a little bit of work with like local governments and public health departments in Texas. Right now I'm working on a trial focused on blood pathogen reduction technology in Uganda, which focuses on reducing transfusion transmitted infections through kind of a new technology that's sort of a rapid blood testing when you're in situations where you don't necessarily have access to like kind of the full spectrum of testing that the CDC might do here in the US. I also work on a statewide project with Access, which is our state's Medicaid program, driving the integration of behavioral health and primary care. And we sort of analyze a few hundred different health plans across the state in terms of how successful they are at integrating primary care. So for example, like when someone is hospitalized for mental illness, encouraging primary care providers to proactively reach out to their patients to connect them to services and just overall to make sure that they're getting the help and support that they need. And then lastly, one of my favorite projects that I'm working on right now is a treatment program for people with opioid use disorder who are currently incarcerated in the Maricopa County jail system. People who have opioid use disorder disproportionately encounter the criminal justice system and are at extremely high risk for overdoses. So we have navigators who actually go into the jails, who connect with patients, who connect them to medication-assisted treatment, and also different social services like housing and employment, because as is kind of the theme of my research, that's just equally as important to connecting people to medical treatment. So a little bit just about kind of I think I was asked to discuss the benefits and challenges of my kind of research and project management role. For me, it was extremely gratifying to be able to get close to different faculty and staff members at ASU who had been, my professors while I was a student. But also just have some really great experiences to share and have given me a lot of guidance and direction as far as sort of what my skill set would be best suited for, of what I would really enjoy and how to get the experiences that would get me to where I want to be in my career. I've also had the opportunity to mentor a lot of undergrad and graduate students. But I do a lot of project management, just kind of continuously facilitating meetings, making sure that, with grants that we're managing our budgets, that we're meeting our deliverables, that we're reporting data on time, submitting reports and all of those kind of things. I also do a lot of grant writing and just continually kind of proposing new research projects and hopefully bringing in sort of more studies. A lot of what I do is very community-based research. So we typically work with community partners and sort of talk about what are the gaps in services that you're seeing in your community right now? Where do you think money needs to be directed? And we take that and turn it into a study and say, how can we really evaluate this in a way that expands the evidence base, while also simultaneously getting money to the community organizations that are doing really good work. And then I also did a lot of policy analysis and development, especially related to veteran suicide prevention, and was able to do some stuff at the federal level, which was really neat, and went to some White House convenings and wrote some testimonies for Congress and submitted some of my capstone work to the legislature at the federal level. And that just kind of really was interesting, working with like politicians and sort of how politicians look at evidence, because I think with research, a lot of times it's not very successfully translated into practice, but how can we take what we're learning in a research setting and apply that in a way that makes the difference in the lives of individuals. Benefits and challenges of my role, it's a lot of project-based work, so it's constantly changing. Sometimes, I'll be on 5 projects and those can all change within the course of the year, but I really like that kind of fast-paced environment. I have a lot of autonomy and I'm able to meet with community partners a lot on my own to kind of decide a lot of the studies that I really want to work on or the papers that I want to write. And for me, I just get to keep kind of focusing in on the projects that really get me excited and that I love talking about. And a lot of publication and presentation opportunities, which for those of you going into grad school, I would really encourage you to start thinking about, because that's definitely extremely important if you're looking to kind of get further in sort of the academic world. And I mentioned before, I was thinking about medical school when I was an undergrad. I pretty quickly in my master's program just realized that that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And I was really interested in sort of the policy implications of how to improve health. Briefly thought about law school. I went through the pain of taking the MCAT and the LSAT and then decided that also wasn't for me, and I have settled. I'm actually applying to PhD programs in health services research, which for me, I think really meets sort of my, I'm a very academically oriented person. I really like being in an academic environment around other researchers. I think also with healthcare in the US, and I know a lot of your global health majors, so you might be looking at other countries, but here in the US, we actually have the most expensive healthcare system in the world and some of the poorest health outcomes in the developed world for a lot of different reasons. So I think, while that's not ideal for Americans, there's a lot of opportunity to be innovative in the way that we design our systems to improve population health. And I think the data-driven side of healthcare is just exploding, and there's a huge need for people who have that kind of experience and expertise. And so that's sort of the direction that I am currently moving towards. Some different opportunities in my industry. I mean, I work in academics, so I'm sure a lot of these are really familiar to a lot of you, but I would just encourage you to look out for different teaching assistant positions. It's really helpful to get close with a faculty member and to hopefully, get connected to additional work opportunities. Any sort of research experience you can get, especially if you're going on to grad school, is really helpful. And then also just different student worker positions. I mean, I think a lot of different jobs, you can learn different skills, even if they're not directly related to your field. And for me, it's always been, I think it's really important to figure out what you like and what drives, what you're passionate about, but it's also equally important to figure out what you don't like, and just sort of the different things that, you're like, okay, well, this wasn't, an ideal experience for me. And so maybe that'll change the different direction that I take in my career. But for those of you who are graduating, ASU posts a lot of different project manager and research associate positions. And so if that's something of interest to you, especially, if you might be taking a gap year, that could be a really good opportunity. If you're interested in working or going to school at ASU, sort of any, if you're at least half-time at ASU, you can get a tuition waiver. And so a lot of people use that to fund graduate education, but there's a lot of different opportunities out there. And I would just really encourage you to kind of get to know your faculty and to see what might be available to you. I know I'm kind of going over a little bit on time, so I'm sorry about that, but here's just kind of some general advice thoughts that I had that might be useful to you. I think I said before, like all experience is good experience. Just getting your foot in the door, and a lot of times, even if it's like an unpaid internship for a semester, might eventually lead to a paid position and to a potential job offer. Networking with your faculty and fellow students. If you have guest lecturers who are coming in from different community organizations, it's a really good way to get to know about potential job opportunities. I really like to do informational interviews where I'll just reach out to professors and just sit down with them for 15 minutes and say like, hey, can you tell me about your career path, about how you got to where you are now? What did you do really well? What advice would you give to me to do differently? Here's kind of my interests. What do you think? What kind of experience do you think would be really beneficial for me, or what can I kind of learn from you? Because faculty and staff just have so many great experiences, and it's really a good opportunity as a student to take advantage of that as much as you can. Getting involved in different extracurriculars with whatever really excites you, I think gives you a lot of good experience. Social media, I know, was like kind of listed as a topic of interest. I absolutely love Twitter. Academics are really big on Twitter, and I sort of have a professional Twitter account that I don't use as much as I should, but it's really a good way for disseminating my publications, my presentations, staying up to date. You're directly connected with faculty and stakeholders from all over the world, and you can kind of get the news and sort of the policy that interests you the most. So I'd really encourage those of you who are interested in that space to check it out. Doing as many conferences and lectures as you can, just learning more about different topics and figuring out what you're really passionate about and what kind of career would interest you is really helpful for me personally. So yeah, that's my contact information. You can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn or email me. I'm more than happy to meet with any students who I might, if it's my career is of interest to you, or if you have any questions for me. But again, thanks so much for listening to me today, and hopefully this was helpful for some of you.
Thank you, Megan. So we have our next panelist here, Kylie, and then after Kylie presents, then we'll come back and kind of talk about, have questions from there. So I'll turn it over to Kylie.
Okay, well, hi everyone. I'm actually gonna start sharing my screen. You'll have to forgive me. My preparation wasn't as impressive as Megan's, so just go with it. I apologize, but let's get the show on the road. All right, guys. So hi. Maybe there we go. So I don't know if you can see this, but my name is Kaylee Eubanks. I'm actually an archaeologist and an art and cultural artifact crime investigator. On the archaeologist side, I work in Southwest archaeology with an emphasis on shell for decorative purposes, for burial decorations and things like that. And on the cultural art and artifact side, I usually work in recovery services of missing, stolen, or looted artifacts or artwork. So it's super fun. I actually graduated from ASU in 2017 with my Bachelor's of Arts in Anthropology. And funny enough, actually, Stephanie Bobar was my advisor. I don't know, she probably doesn't remember me, but she helped me a lot. So when I saw her, I was like, oh, yes. But yeah, I actually was first emphasizing in cultural anthropology with an emphasis on folklore. However, through some short projects I was able to attend and participate in, I actually found my love for the physical archaeology side, as well as the art crime side. So super eye-opening. I did want to put out some pros and cons of the field. Now, my presentation isn't as narrow, so this is just a general kind of thing. It'll vary depending on if you decide to move into the field in archaeology or more of the business and paper and research side of things. But travel is probably one of the biggest things you'll ever deal with in terms of being a field archaeologist or an art and art crime investigator. So it can weigh heavily on people. You'll be gone for months at a time. You'll be sleeping in tents or, you know, on a boat if you're doing excavation for World War II archaeology in Saipan. And they're not always like the best, most 5-star impressive hotels either. So the conditions are ever changing and you're gone for a lot of time. So that can weigh heavily on people. So that's always something I try to emphasize a lot. Usually people, as they grow older and they want to start a family, it's hard for them to be able to travel and work as a field archaeologist. So that's something I always like to throw out there. And for the art and archive side, there's always the possibility of you're dealing with people who have, in one way or another, stolen or looted or possibly stolen or looted artifacts. And so there's going to be high stakes involved with it. Usually you work alongside a government agency. Like I personally work along the FBI art crime team, the Department of Homeland Security Investigations, Antiquity Trafficking Task Force. That's a long name, I know. But so you usually work as like a liaison or an undercover agent on behalf of this government agency. So that can also put you in some kind of high stressful situations. So things like that I kind of stress as well, because people don't really understand how the field works unless they're really thrown into it. But on the other side, if you're someone who's obsessed with like culture and history and travel, this is definitely a job that would be very rewarding. Like, I honestly could not picture myself doing anything else. It's absolutely ever changing, like constantly changing. From like week to week, day by day, I'll be on a different project. So there's also that unpredictability. That's both, you know, a con and a pro. At least I think so. So as you can see, career trajectory. So I'm sorry, I think I'm going a little fast, but believe it or not, archaeologists are quite essential, from anything from infrastructure to academic purposes to cultural research and significance, as well as law enforcement. So for example, you want to build anything anywhere, you need an archaeologist. You can't build anything without having an archaeologist review it. And if there's determined to be historical significance, then you need an archaeologist out there during the construction process or in the preservation process. So between the infrastructure side and the government side, dealing with international organizations and international relations that have to do with cultural significance or historic ties, an archaeologist, anthropologist would definitely be needed in this field. So we won't be going away anytime soon. I personally have seen it skyrocket, believe it or not, during this pandemic. It's been outstanding in terms of field work, because a lot of things are put on hold except for us, because we have to do all the initial research before any shovel goes in the ground or any policy is written or any museum changes their factors or their collections. So we've been pretty busy, and it doesn't seem like it'll be stopping anytime soon. So I have some entry-level positions. With field archaeology, the best you're going to get is a field technician. Now, this is a job that is really, really focused on grabbing people that are recent graduates, because this is going to teach you anything and everything about archaeology. It'll teach you lab work, research, inventory, how to handle artifacts. You have to work on excavations, testings, data recoveries, map searches, creations of maps. So field technician really is where you're going to learn all the skill set, even if you drift into a different field that's closely connected. So as I put here, the academic and lab research assistant is kind of the entry level that many people go into. I know a few who started off as lab assistants and research assistants who are now working on collections at, you know, the Harvard Museum. So that would be kind of the entry level for the academic and lab side. For cultural heritage and policy, we actually have quite a few who are very interested in the policies between, you know, tribal organizations and the United States government. So a government assistant or intern, some paid, some not, would really be able to get your foot in the door in terms of that. They are really cool, actually. I mean, I work a lot with government agencies such as the Department of Cultural Affairs and UNESCO, and they work really hard on ever-changing policies. So if that's something that you always felt like that was your calling, that would be a great area to look into at first. And as you can see, art and antiquities crime, government is really the way to go. Just like kind of the cultural heritage and policy, who are very closely related. Usually a paid internship or an unpaid internship is the focus of entry level into this field. There's also the law enforcement side. I know many who go from being a police officer or a special agent who then shift into the task force team or the art crime team as they develop an appreciation and emphasis of importance on cultural heritage. So that's definitely a route you can go as well. So there's many options depending on what kind of archaeologist or anthropologist you're wanting to evolve into. So my advice for students, I'm actually part of the ASU Mentor Network. And every time I have someone reach out to me, I tell them almost the same thing, is we look a lot in volunteer work. We want to see if you've worked for museums or if you've worked with quote unquote shovel bum college and university programs where you work with documentation and inventory. We're really trying to see if you have any experience doing the physical work before you come into the field, but it's definitely not a deal breaker, but it helps a lot. As Megan actually mentioned, a lot of social media is pretty important in this day and age. LinkedIn is actually a very big platform for people that work in archaeology and anthropology, because you're meeting people from the American Archaeology Association and the Society of American Anthropology, and we hold conferences with these. So I went to an SAA in Albuquerque and I met the director of the FBI art crime team and the president of the American Archaeological Association. So connecting with them also on LinkedIn helps a lot in terms of connecting into the network, because actually a pretty small network. So I suggest definitely taking advantage of those conferences and those organizations and finding us on LinkedIn. I also put some interview tips. We're pretty flexible. I remember my interview, my boss actually was just out on an excavation and like came in completely covered in dirt. It was like, hi, so you're here for an interview? And here I was in like a suit. So I was like, yes. So we're pretty business casual. We're pretty, or like I said, we're mainly covered in dirt and outside. So if you display a sense of okayness with that kind of environment and you express interest and knowledge into the field that you're working on, so for example, in Arizona, it would be Southwest archaeology, we're pretty laid back in terms of interview process. Some people just showed up to work one day and that was it. So my advice would definitely be to express knowledge and interest in the field, to relax, because we're very business casual, we're very laid back people, and we're usually playing in the dirt. So we're also not very grown up. A lot of people come into our agencies and they're practically sweating. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. Well, I'm over there like eating a burrito, like, come on, let's go. You know, so I also emphasize heavily on just having fun with it and relaxing, but also expressing that you have knowledge in the field that a specific company works with. Sorry guys, I know I'm going really fast, but kind of just me panicking. But I did set up my company websites that I was going to show you guys. As on the archaeology side, I work for Paleo West Archaeology. We're based here in Phoenix, Arizona, but we have offices in about 7 states. We do work in, well, maybe. So we're pretty cool. We work from everything in GIS to archaeological excavation, to lab work, to museum studies, to technology. I mean, we're all over the place. We have tribal consultation. I mean, I can go on and on, but that's why I wanted to show you the link as well, because it shows how diverse of things we work in. So there's also opportunities for people who may not be as heavily interested in the field side. There's clearly other options where the technology and the business and the report writing and the policy side come into play. We are also currently hiring, so I wanted to throw that out there. If you do want to apply, I suggest you go for the archaeological field technician position, because that is the entry-level position. We do have a project coming up where we would be sent to Saipan. We're going to be working in World War II archaeology as well as Pacific Island archaeology. We'll be out there for a year. So I know it's a lot of a commitment, but also pretty exciting. So if you guys decide that's something you guys are really interested in, it would again be the technician level archaeologist, and you actually would be out working with me. So maybe that doesn't sound too bad. I hope it doesn't sound. But on the art and artifact recovery side, I work for Odyssey Global Consulting. It was a previous government organized facility that has now moved into the private sector. As I mentioned, we work a lot in due diligence and the recovery of stolen and looted artifacts and artworks. We work alongside customs, and as you can see, we do art fraud, theft, forgeries. So we work more on both the field work and recovering these artifacts, but also in the research and digital side of things to prove that they're authentic or who they actually belong to. So if you want to learn more about us, we do have an interview with Worthwhile Magazine that is on the website. And we also have some previous cases that we have worked on. So definitely check both of those out if I can get back to where I belong. But actually, that is it for me, guys. I'm sorry that it was super fast and a hot mess, but appreciate you guys going with me. And again, I am on the ASU Mentor Network. All my contact information is on my profile. Excuse me. And that's kind of my main focus of this, is I try to do my best in, excuse me, reaching out to like current students on their way through graduation and where I can send them and how I can help them improve and evolve into their next level. So yeah, definitely reach out to me whenever. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the only archaeologist on the Mentor Network. But yeah, that's really it for me. So I thank you guys for hanging out with me with this and dealing with the fast-paced word fiasco. But yeah, thank you guys.
So I want to thank both Kylie and Megan. So before we get to questions, I know that Amanda shared some of the resources in the chat that they referred to. Amanda, do you want to kind of highlight some of those that we have?
Sure. So that mentor network that Kaylee's a part of, and actually has served as a special alumni career volunteer with our department too. So we're super grateful for her for that. But the mentor network is a platform that you all have access to as students and going into your alumni status as well once you graduate. But there we have a ton of alumni and professionals on this platform that you're able to connect with and send messages to. The cool thing too is like everyone on this platform has volunteered for it. They're saying, yes, I want to connect with you. We certainly recommend utilizing LinkedIn for that too. But the great thing about it, the difference is that on LinkedIn, you like kind of have to ask, like, is it okay if I talk to you? Like, will you connect with me? Whereas on the Mentor Network, everyone is signed up to actually talk to you. There's actually pre-made templates too for you to send some messaging through. And so you can filter based on, I want to find an archaeologist like Haley, or someone that had your major, or someone that's just in a specific kind of industry too. So there's a lot of different filters that you can use to search through that. So if you head to that link, you just use your My ASU login information and you'll have full access to that platform. Something else that's not through our department that I shared in there is a link to just professional development funding. Student government typically goes through application processes each semester. So if there are opportunities that you want to take advantage of and there's like registration costs or travel or anything like that, there is funding available. They just have all of their different rules and stuff. So make sure you review all of that. But that's definitely a cool opportunity to make sure that you're kind of familiar with.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have time for questions. So what questions do you have for our panelists? And again, you can just unmute or share it in the chat. And I'm watching the chat as well.
I have a question. It's sort of a two-part question, I guess. Well, in regards to government assistant or internship positions, are there positions like that available for undergraduates? And if so, what type of can you give me examples of organizations that I could do that for as a global health major?
Was that to me or to Kaylee?
Either one, I suppose. I guess you both kind of talked about internships. So, but I was mainly interested in like government programs.
Yeah, I don't know too much. So I've worked with a lot of politicians, obviously. So they have different kind of internships in their offices and can connect you to federal agencies. I'm blanking on the name, but I know there's also like government workforce development programs that I've had some friends from Global Health go into, where they did this was, I guess, more after they graduated, but they would do like a year, I don't call it a residency, I'm blanking on the word, but a year-long program with the CDC. And so I know they're like based in Atlanta and they'll go all over the country too. And they have those different kind of programs that are essentially trying to funnel you into a government position. I know there's different like scholarships too, incentivizing people to work for different federal agencies. I'm sure other people on this call could probably speak more to that, but that's what I know.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty typical pathway with most agencies. If there's one to look at, just look at, I think Pathways program is like a common terminology too with some of the government departments where they set up like that. And Megan, you totally talked about it with like internship based entry level. So I think that's definitely one of the places. Any department, look at the internship site, pathway site, whatever that terminology they're using.
Okay.
I know, Kylie, did you want to add anything with some of the internships?
Yeah, they kind of hit it right on the spot. So I know more of the government in terms of international relations and policy, but just as they mentioned, you know, the Department of Cultural Affairs or UNESCO, they'll have internship sections. And it doesn't always pertain to just archaeology or anthropology. I have seen some global health. Another one actually you might want to look at is Interpol. We actually work a lot with Interpol, and because they're also an international organization and they don't just work with archaeology and art crime side, they also work with the global health side alongside government facilities like CDC and things like that. So my best advice would definitely just be looking through these departments of whatever it is that you're interested in, whether it be global health or, Department of Cultural Affairs, and check their internship area, but also reach out to people that are working in the project. That the best you can do is go directly to the source. That was something that I utilized a lot. I found people that work in the field that I wanted to work in, and I reached out to them, and they directly were like, hey, yeah, we actually have an internship coming up right now. You should apply for it. So that's another thing I could probably suggest to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll add too, I know there are a lot of different private foundations that do different fellowship programs. So like I'm thinking of like the Clinton Foundation does a global health fellowship placement program. And there's, I think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I could be wrong on that, but there's different, if you kind of search for global health fellowships or internships, there's a lot of, I think, opportunities that are really geared towards people who have just graduated, just trying to get their kind of feet wet, and hopefully give you the experience to find kind of a long-term career.
Okay.
So we had some questions submitted when students RSVP. And so on the side, I'm going to share one. Megan, could you talk a little bit about your experience working with and around politicians? Any advice for how to interact with politicians and their offices, or pitfalls to avoid?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. One thing I would recommend if you're interested in policy, so Senator Kirsten Sinema actually teaches at ASU. She's in the Graduate School of Social Work. I took her class. I was not really in a degree program at the time. I just took it while I was working at ASU. It's called a public policy and advocacy class. Really interesting experience. She like flies in from DC. We do an all-day Sunday class, and then she flies back to DC that night. But that class, I think really, I had worked in Senator McCain's office, and I had done some work with Mayor Kate Gallego in Phoenix. But her class like really changed the way that I think about how to communicate with politicians. We would do these assignments and write papers, and she would literally like grade us right in front of us. Like we would speak about our paper for 2 minutes, and then she'd just hand it to you and say, okay, here's, an A, B, C, whatever. And one of her key lessons, it's really basic, but she was like, just use section headers. Like politicians skim everything. As a researcher, I want to write like the 100-page report with all of my sources and be super detailed and nuanced. And politicians really just want like, okay, what's the gist? What's the implications? Yes, you studied this and you have all these qualifications, but what is important to me as a politician to know to change at a policy level? So super clear, like concise writing, having clear outlines that really like highlight what your recommendations are and why that's politically advantageous. She kind of teaches you too how to speak to both sides of the aisle. Obviously, working in Senator McCain's office is very different than working in Senator Sinema's office. And there's different issues that there's a lot of like language and sort of the way that you frame things and develop a political narrative that makes things appealing to one side or the other, or hopefully as a compromise. But it's a really interesting experience. I think if you're sort of interested in politics and policy, any kind of internships in a politician's office, they are always like hiring. It's just a really good experience. And for me, I felt like that was just a really impactful way to sort of translate the work that I do in an academic setting into kind of a more real, tangible way. Thanks for that question. That's a good one.
I know if Kylie, do you want to add anything with that one?
So policy and politicians are actually surprisingly a daily part of an archaeologist's life. We work with politicians on both the United States government side, but also on the tribal side. And a lot of great points were made. You definitely want to be clear and concise about what the end goal is, but I also suggest really researching the person you're trying to approach. For example, I also have done projects with Arizona State Land Department where before even the archaeologists go out there, you have to talk to the tribal organizations that have ancestral claim to the area and basically get permissions to do any kind of research there. And tribal personalities vary greatly. So you'll definitely be handling different policies and types of politicians depending on the tribe you're working with. So I feel like your best way to approach that would to research how this organization, this politician, or this policy is focused and emphasized on, or what they deemed important, and kind of run with that. Because as Megan mentioned, they're like, yeah, that's great, you're really smart, but what are we talking about here? Like, what's, you know, the bullet points here? So my advice would definitely be to research everything about the policy or the politician before you even take your first steps to approach them, so that you're able to emphasize the points that you're trying to make, but will also connect with their interests and their participation with it.
Okay, thank you. There's another question in the chat. So I see both of you have had many research projects and collaborative efforts with different organizations, sometimes at once. Do you often move and or consistently looking for new jobs or projects? And do you often find yourself in between different work?
Okay, so I'm going to grab that one first. Yes, archaeology at first, archaeological field technician position, which is the entry-level position to get into archaeology, is temporary. It is a project-based position. So if that company has projects, you stay employed. So at first, there might be a year where you work for 7 different companies on a cultural project. But if you emphasize your work ethic and your knowledge, then they usually grab you as a full-time employee. And that's the stable part of it. You don't have to have 6 different W-2s, but you're constantly working on multiple projects. There'll be a month where you have to live in Alaska on a project, or there'll be a month you work in Montana or New York or Saipan. So there's definitely a lot of movement. Projects, once you have the permanent position, you have more authority to be like, oh no, I'm not gonna deal with this one. But the temporary positions, they do emphasize on, can you, will you, okay, you're hired, kind of thing. So at the beginning, there will definitely be a lot of multiple projects, multiple companies, and constantly moving. So that's also something I just wanted to throw out there because it's a very prominent thing with this field.
Yeah, so I definitely am kind of the opposite of that. I do not move really ever. I do travel a lot, or at least did pre-COVID. I spent a lot of time in DC, and then would do a lot of traveling like for conferences and different organizations that we work with around the world. I work with a lot of organizations at this point, mostly in Arizona. And it's always kind of interesting working with different community partners because they all have very different objectives. If you're working for a politician versus state government versus local government, they all have very different perspectives. But I think one point that I'm just going to emphasize that Kaylee highlighted is like communicating your value is super important. I also did a lot of project-based work. I have a faculty position. So initially it was a little bit on and off for me. You know, I'd pick up teaching contracts, but maybe, you know, that would lapse over winter break, and different grants can sort of start and end at different dates. And so for a while I was really kind of piecing together a full-time contract that I have now. But just, you know, think of every project, every interaction with a partner as kind of an opportunity to show what you can bring to the table. You know, even I think as like fresh out of school, you feel like, oh, I don't know enough, or I don't really know what to contribute or what my role is. Even the little stuff like, you know, taking meeting minutes and setting meeting agendas and having your screen ready to share and just being on time and dressing professionally, you know, depending on your environment, like that little stuff, like people really do notice and remember. And for me, I started working for a lot of my professors, and they remembered me because I spoke up in class a lot and because I asked questions after class. And one of my bosses literally hired me because I went to a conference and presented there, and he was so impressed by it. He was like, I want you to work for me. So you never know like when a potential job opportunity will come up. Like, I think applying to kind of cold call postings online can be really stressful. So as much as you can develop those relationships, meet professional organizations at conferences, just match with people on LinkedIn and say like, hey, do you know anything available? Like, I think that's where people tend to find the most success in finding, long-term careers.
Thank you. I think Jacob had his hand up. So if you have your question, go ahead and ask.
I did. Mine's directed towards Kaylee. I'm a anthropology major, and I noticed that a lot of the CRM field technician positions out there, there's a lot of them out there. Is it as competitive as it seems? So first part of that question is, how can you stand out? Best way to stand out for CRM positions. And then the second is, I see a lot of the job descriptions saying that you're gonna walk like 15 miles a day and all that stuff. And it makes it sound pretty brutal. I have taken a field school, but I don't think I remembered walking 15 miles a day. So kind of give me the realities of the actual work that you're going to be doing as a field technician, if you would, please.
Yeah, definitely. So the field technician field, in a way, yes, is very competitive because everyone wants that project. However, there's so many companies out there that it's pretty easy to snag one of those contracts. So in a way it is competitive, but it's also not competitive. There are definitely ways to kind of stand out. We've actually had a few who actually were not anthropology majors. They were actually history majors. One didn't even go to college, but he expressed real life knowledge in being able to, decipher what a ceramic looks like versus what, a lithic looks like, what type of brownstone this is, what is that a feature of a ball court or of a pit house, and soil samples. Now, I'm not saying you would have to know all of this right off the bat, but to be able to display that like introductory level of knowledge really sticks with us, because we do care about professional experience and education, but we had one who he worked for 16 years in construction and he never went to college, but he showed knowledge in real life terms of archaeology. He showed us he knew what he was talking about, basically. So we took the chance and it worked out great. So being able to express that you understand those things, that's kind of why I also emphasize that I work in shell for decorative purposes, because that shows I understand different levels of archaeology that we can emphasize on. There's also contact, staying in constant communication with us, talking about, hey, just applied, I wanted to introduce myself. We had one who would call us, every couple of days and ask how the process was going, and that kind of stuck with us. We're like, oh, this person is really driven, this person knows the real life archaeology that they're talking about, so why not, kind of thing. As for the field work with the 15 miles a day, I'm not gonna lie to you, that's definitely something that we do big time. However, there's nobody who would ever force that kind of physical effort from you. If that's just something you're uncomfortable with or just have limitations with. I know some people who just, usually those 15 miles a day are surveys, and they'll say, hey, I just don't want to do a survey. That physical requirement for that survey isn't something I feel comfortable with. So I'd rather work in construction monitoring or in the lab or in report writing. And we'll say, cool, you know, or if you do come out to the surveys with the 15 miles a day, the crews are really big on health and safety. So sometimes if it's too hot or if people feel uncomfortable walking, we'll end it after a mile or two because health and safety is over everything. So don't feel like you're ever pressured to do any of that physical activity just to keep the position. There's definite room for compromise because we're highly emphasized on health and safety. So don't feel any, you know, reservations for that at all. I know someone like just straight up just doesn't go out because they just don't feel comfortable doing those long treks. So yeah, that's basically the best I can offer you right now. Feel free to like reach out to me on the mentor network. And I'll explain more in detail if you want. But yeah, best ways to stick out would be constant communication, showing real life knowledge of the section you're wanting to work on, and understanding that you could possibly have a lot of physical activity with this position, but that it's never absolutely required. That we have so many different levels of work that it shouldn't be a second thought that, oh no, if I can't do this 15 miles, I'm not going to get this job. Like, we'll definitely work with that for sure. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I just didn't know how realistic it was because a lot of ads were saying, hey, you're going to walk this long and all that. I just, not that I can't do it. I just, you know, want to know what to expect in real life.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Are there other questions? Well, we can break out into some breakout rooms with Kylie or Megan if some of you are interested in really talking to them one-on-one about some of the things that they shared during the presentation or our discussion today. So if people are interested in that, we have a little bit of time. We probably could take 10 or 15 minutes to do that. And then, you know, we'll come back into our large space and wrap up our program for the day.